I don't want to be leveling up if leveling up means we're just going to be playing shows with Coheed and Cambria and getting this hot shit producer to do our record. And that had become, I think, the prize.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, if you want to support the podcast, it's only $1 a month over at Patreon. It's patreon.com/thiswasthescene. $1 a month equates to like 2 Starbucks lattes a year, maybe 1.5 these days from inflation. It's really not that much, so if you want to help support with keeping the lights on for this thing, that would be great. As Friends Russ is an American melodic hardcore band based in Gainesville, Florida. The original lineup, which included vocalist Damien Moyal, guitarist Henry Olmino, bass guitarist Jeronimo Gomez, and drummer Matthew Crum, formed in Davie, Florida in September 1996. After recording a demo tape but failing to secure a record deal, the band parted ways in February 97. They got back together shortly after and have been playing a bunch of shows and putting out releases since then. Check out their latest album, Any Joy, which was released last year and is available wherever you get your music. I reached out to Damien on Instagram, asked him if he wanted to be on the podcast. He said yeah, and I got him on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. Starting Shai Hulud, why he was in so many bands, the reason for multiple lineups in the beginning, my own band playing a show with them on tour, signing to Doghouse Records, not having a specific sound for the band, narrowly avoiding dying on multiple occasions. These stories are wild. The Polish Mafia gig, announcing new songs in 2008 with no delivery, which does he like better, Fest or Furnace Fest, and a ton more. Lastly, if your company needs an explainer video, that's what I do for a living. My company is drive80.com, drive80.com. Do explainer videos, whiteboard animations, logo animations, and that's pretty much it. You want some information? Just email me at mike@drive80.com. Also, go follow the podcast Instagram. It's This Was The Scene. I pretty much focus all my time on that account. I just kind of repost things to Facebook and Twitter and things like that. But I spend a lot of time on the Instagram. And also when people message me, I message them back. So if you have any questions, that's the best place to get in contact with me. So go give that a follow and tell your friends. That's all I got to say. So feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. I was listening to the new album, and Final Form is fucking awesome, dude.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's I don't know I don't know if you hate hearing this or if you've ever heard this, but your voice there, it kind of reminded me of like Sponge from back in the day.
You know, Sponge is a band that for some it might just be like a testament to how regional music kind of is, even on like a radio station level. But I don't feel like I ever heard Sponge in Florida. It wasn't until I moved to Michigan and went to a bar where my friend did Plowed karaoke. And when he was done, I was like, man, that was awesome. What song was that? And he couldn't believe I didn't know what song he had just sung. So that was my first exposure to Sponge. And since then, I'm pretty convinced that's like one of the top 5 like alternative rock songs of that decade.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And I missed it when it was happening.
Well, what were you listening to? Like, was this, I mean, yeah, at that time it was around like 92, or like mid 90s when that
Probably
came out.
Mid 90s, yeah.
So I guess this is a good way to start then, because I usually ask what leads you to get into the scene. But at that time, were you involved in the scene, and what were you like listening to?
Yeah, mid 90s, I was already in hardcore bands and kind of just only listening to, well, no, I would say by the mid 90s, I was starting to be a little disenchanted with hardcore music. I was very much immersed in the scene and going to every show that I could and playing in bands. I think 96, I have to place this by like places I was living. So 96 was a lot of Unwound, Codeine, a lot of Britpop stuff, Marion, Pulp, Blur, Ride, stuff like that. Hip hop. And yeah, I mean, there was still plenty of like hardcore. I think 96, I was also listening to like a lot of His Hero Is Gone and Dystopia and stuff like that. But you still absorb it. I mean, you go to the mall and you hear all the songs that are playing on the radio, even if you're not listening to the radio. And I just don't remember that song. But I've never gotten that comparison, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's just when I started hearing it, I was just like, oh wow, I can hear it in his voice. So okay, so when you start, like, how'd you get involved in the scene?
Through metal. Basically, I always gravitated toward rock music just from the radio or like the few kind of more rockin' records that my parents had in their collection, and then ultimately Van Halen and Ozzy and stuff like that. That was kind of elementary school days. By seventh grade, I was pretty committed to thrash metal. I was a thrasher, Anthrax and Metallica and stuff like that. I was aware of punk rock was kind of on the periphery. I think just because as a kid you gravitate toward those more shocking scenes or whatever. So I was aware of, like, I knew who the Sex Pistols were. I knew who Dead Kennedys were. I started seeing in metal magazines ads for Corrosion of Conformity with like just their like spike skull logo. For some reason, that logo was like really just kind of immediately iconic to me, and it made me like really curious. So then I ended up getting Corrosion of Conformity, Eye for an Eye, which to me at the time, only listening to like really produced thrash metal and some other stuff. I also listened to like Guns N' Roses or whatever. But to me, it was Corrosion of Conformity was just like a really sloppy, poorly recorded, poorly executed metal band because I didn't really know how else to frame them. And it wasn't kind of until later that I ever heard the term hardcore. I definitely didn't hear them as a punk band. But yeah, I think it was basically Corrosion of Conformity, Exploited kind of started pulling me a little bit away from metal, and then Minor Threat, 7 Seconds, Dag Nasty were some of the first hardcore bands that I ever got into, and I think when I first around that same time was when I also got the New York hardcore, The Way It Is and Where the Wild Things Are compilations. And that was the first time I kind of was able to connect a term to the genre, hardcore. So that would have been 91-ish, Sick of It All, bands like that. And then I got kind of, I think at the same time, I was getting a little bored of thrash metal, and I was listening to like some death metal too at the time. And it all just sort of started feeling stale. I think it was around the machoification of maybe like every genre at the time, but that's when like everyone started cutting their hair and wearing wife beater tank tops, and everything got super like hyper masculine and tough, and the solos disappeared and everything was like very groove heavy. And I got kind of bored. I wasn't into that. It wasn't the thrash that I was kind of looking for anymore. So I basically at that point just took my interest in hardcore as kind of I just was like, I'm just gonna just go deep into all of this. That was early 90s, started playing in bands around then, like 92-ish, I think, was my first band.
Were you always singing?
Yeah, I didn't play an instrument. I didn't grow up in a musical household or anything like that. I was one of a handful of like punk hardcore kids at my high school. So when some friends who had been in a band called Midget Stew broke up, they wanted to start a new band, and they asked me to sing, which I've always joked was because I had a shaved head. There was really, I had no other credentials, but yeah, it was slim pickings and I had a funny haircut. So I started singing for them. That was, we called that band US Decline. I left for a while. They continued with a new singer, recorded like a pretty good demo and played a bunch of shows. I don't think that I ever actually even got around to playing a show with them.
So you did that, and then you didn't even get to, you guys just practiced the whole time?
We practiced. We wrote a bunch of songs. I had to go away, and I was like, yeah, get another singer, which ended up being a pattern that kind of followed me throughout many different bands, where it was like I'd start a band and then they'd finish with someone else.
Can I ask why that was happening?
Well, in that particular situation, I was still a minor. I was in kind of partial state custody. I had left my house at like 15, and I was kind of in between hanging out with friends and doing bands and going to shows and stuff. I was in like group homes, foster homes. I was kind of institutionalized in various places. So when I left, it was because I had to go to like some program for a minimum of 6 months for like behavioral and drug. It was a dual diagnosis kind of thing. Yeah. So I left thinking I was going to be gone for like a year and a half or something, and, told them get another singer. They did. I came back 6 months later and just started another band in the same crew of people, the same kind of neighborhood scene.
What city were you in at this point?
This was in North Miami Beach.
Were you like going to local shows at this time, or were you just kind of just playing in bands and then just not really getting to play like out loud?
I was going to local shows. We had that same crew of bands, US Decline, and then there was a band called Sloth, the Shrooms, my next band, Insist. We all kind of were, there was this, the drummer of US Decline and our friend Morris started a zine called Idiot Nation, and then they also started putting out tapes on a label called Pathetic Records, PR. At some point, they also started doing shows at a venue in North Miami Beach, and this kind of scene sort of propped up around it that was hyper local. I wouldn't even say it was the South Florida scene or the Miami scene. It was kind of this neighborhood scene, this North Miami Beach kind of sub-local scene. But yeah, I was going to local shows beyond that, and then some, touring shows I saw. I think the first like big show I ever went to was, or big like hardcore show anyway, was Exploited in 91. So yeah, I was already going to shows, but not tons at that point. This was still, I didn't have a car or money. So it was kind of, you were at the mercy of whatever shows your friends were going to. You were at the mercy of whatever music you could get your hands on, usually by borrowing and dubbing a tape from a friend. So it was a much smaller world, but I was very much in it.
So how does this lead to the band starting?
Which one?
As Friends Rust.
Oh, okay. So that's
because that's like 96, right? When you guys start that?
Yeah, that started in 96. So the path to As Friends Rust was basically after doing those kind of smaller, more neighborhood punk hardcore bands, I ended up in Culture, who by local standards were already doing kind of bigger and better things. They had recorded. Actually, that might be it. They had recorded, which was like kind of some next level stuff, and they had like a label interested in putting out another record. So I joined that band, which kind of kicked open the doors to the hardcore scene at large, which I hadn't really been accessing. I didn't have like stable addresses, so it was hard to like mail order stuff. I didn't have I was pen pals with the guy from this distro or like this person from this band kind of story that a lot of hardcore kids who maybe were in a more stable position to kind of investigate, or network on that level seemed to have. So it took Culture. That was, I guess, 94 is when I joined Culture, was my first exposure to like suddenly we were playing shows outside of South Florida. Well, not far, it was like Tampa, but the idea of traveling to a show, let alone playing a show in another city, was kind of crazy to me. And we were playing kind of actual real venues and not empty spaces above a carpet shop. And, it just kind of, I guess, leveled up a little bit in terms of like being a more serious affair. So after Culture, Shai Hulud started that, left. Also around the same time was doing Morning Again with John Wiley, who had also left Culture by then. So we started that separate band.
Wait. You started Shai Hulud?
Yeah, Matt Fox and I.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I was the first of many singers.
Holy shit! Wait, so were you the one right before Chad, or?
Yeah, right before Chad.
Wow.
We recorded a 6-song demo that's on their. In the early 2000s, they did a release called like a comprehensive retrospective. That's for the most part a lot of kind of like throwaway stuff and kind of handheld tape recorder kind of sessions, but it starts with our 6 studio songs, the demo.
I feel like anyone listening is gonna be like, "You didn't fucking know he was the fucking singer Shiloh." I'll be like, "God damn it, I lost some scene points there."
Well, a lot of people do know, but it also I think they did a good job kind of burying it a little bit because for a minute around this time I was in all the bands, and I think that probably got a little bit annoying to anybody that I was in bands with. So I think when they really started kind of picking up and taking off, they just kind of started the history books at the Chad chapter, which is more than fair because that's I think when they really like stepped up the music they were writing. Chad's got like the best screaming voice and for that band period. So it was just kind of a demo that got buried, and this is before people were really on the internet or whatever. But when it is out there, it's listenable. Yeah, I think it's really good. It's actually what we sent to Revelation that got their interest, and then the prospect of touring with those guys, we didn't get along very well, so the prospect of touring I think became like pretty intimidating or daunting on a kind of interpersonal level. I put in my resignation. No one tried to stop me. I think it was pretty mutual. Yeah, and then they got Chad.
What were you like trying to get out of this at this point? Because it's like, were you kind of attaching yourself to bands as the thing you just wanted to do for like the rest of your life?
No, I I think it became sort of compulsive. I just think like once I got a taste for kind of writing lyrics and recording in a studio and having the stuff come out and having people know the lyrics and sing along, it was a fix, that I just needed. I don't know if it's validation I'm looking for or attention. That would be maybe kind of the easy thing. But like, I think I just I need to be making shit. There's very immediate gratification with it. It's like instant results. You write something, you yell it, you can hear it right away. You put it on tape, you can listen to it at home that same night. And I liked that because I'm very present tense kind of guy. Like I don't really think ahead as much as I should. I kind of operate in these like little 48-hour windows. So for me, it was just something very like immediate that I could get some gratification from. And so yeah, I don't know what it was, because in 96, at the start of 96, I was still in Shai Hulud and Morning Again. By the end of 96, I was in As Friends Rust, Bird of Ill Omen, and Back in Culture. So in that year, there were like 5 pretty active bands. I think I was in 3 at once.
Why were you doing so many bands at one time instead of just sticking with one?
That's where I start to think that on some level it was kind of a compulsion or an addiction. I didn't really, there wasn't anything else going on in my life that felt super validating. It was the only thing that I was making that had kind of real tangible impact, I guess.
Did you like it because it got you around? I guess I'm trying to think of it just from what you're saying, the lifestyle you had at that time. Like, did you find it was not like an escape, but it was more of a, I mean, the whole thing, reason everyone got involved in the scene and they loved it, from conversation I have and just remembering from my own personal experience, is that you felt this whole tribe that you were looking for. Is that kind of part of it too, that brought you to like wanting to do so many bands, and just because it connected you to the scene as more than not going to shows?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure there was a bit of that. I think I also there were just different things that I wanted to work out. So in my mind, the bands were like, even if looking back, they weren't too different musically, some of them like Morning Again and Culture. I think that I just wanted to like work out different things lyrically or thematically with different bands. So I just always felt like there was other stuff that I wanted to be doing that I hadn't done yet. Like with As Friends Rust, it was like, oh, here's a chance to kind of try some more melodic stuff, or call upon influences and references that I haven't been able to with Culture or Morning Again or Shai Hulud, which is a lot of the hardcore that I kind of got into in my formative years. That was more, like Dag Nasty or 7 Seconds, Gorilla Biscuits, where I just wanted to try something a little bit cleaner, a little bit more melodic. Yeah, and then I would say, yeah, by then I had toured. '96, summer of '96 was my first tour with Morning Again, which definitely gave me that bug. When I rejoined Culture in '97, we went to Europe, which was my first time in Europe, and that was all I needed. Like going to another country and seeing kids that like I wasn't aware that they even had a hardcore scene, let alone were into like my band, singing my lyrics was just it was a type of, yeah, I'm gonna just say validation again, that I got hooked on. And I would challenge any hardcore singer to say that they don't have the same sort of like that kind of feedback loop is it's immediate and it feels pretty damn good. And it just kind of like, it was really cool that that the scene just was bigger than I realized. And we had gotten into some weird little corners of it in very far away places. And that was just something I found very satisfying and couldn't let go of. And I guess still haven't.
I had an interview and we were talking about hardcore, and I was like, the difference that I never thought of until that conversation was that hardcore just connects you with the audience more than any other style at that time, or I think even now. Well, maybe at that time, like, a ska band and punk bands, like hardcore was literally the singers like jumping in the crowd and like throwing the mic in people's faces. So the connection there, and like, you keep say validation totally, but I feel like just the connection's so much stronger, and it's got to just be like exciting every time that happens.
Yeah, there is. And I've sorry to bore anyone who's maybe heard me say this in a different interview, if anyone's ever bothered to listen to another one, but I've talked about this a few times. Getting into Minor Threat, one of the first things that struck me was there's that photo of Ian on the floor surrounded by other bald-headed kids in t-shirts, who are like the same age. He's got the mic out. They're all sort of like screaming along. That image had like a profound effect on me. Coming from metal, which there's a lot more costume and a lot more theatrics, and the band kind of lords over the crowd, right? You're this inaccessible, you are rock stars. You're up there, we're down here. You're gracing us with your presence, and you're going to kind of play all these fantasy themed kind of songs that are not really personally relatable down to the crowd. I liked it. I still do. But there was something about that image that sort of, it was just a paradigm shift, I guess, where I was like, oh, wow, there's no stage at all. This guy is standing on the ground. He's shorter than half these people. There's no costume. They're in t-shirts and jeans. They look like my friends. And they all know the lyrics, and they can all, if they can get to the mic, they can all be a part of that band. And so that was like, I've been chasing that, and I think like gang vocal kind of pile up parts my whole life. Those were like the two real hallmarks of hardcore for me in those early stages, was like this connection, like you said, and this kind of accessibility. And then also just the sound of 50 or 20, whatever, angry kids yelling in unison, that kind of gang vocal part. And I would say that those are still sort of like the North Stars when I'm writing hardcore songs, is like, I want it to be relatable. I want it to be something that everybody can sort of feel like they're a part of. And I want to create space to hear them too. So I always try to like write in obscenely catchy sing-alongs that like, you only need to hear this song once, and if nothing else, you will remember this one line, because I'll just repeat it obnoxiously so that you can never forget it. But by the end of the song, you'll be up front singing. That's that photo.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying that, because if I'm on Google Images right now, and even like your Instagram, it's just it stands out when you're singing, like these photos, just like it's like you're almost in the crowd, like basically everyone's just surrounding you, so you could see that you hold on to that whole thing.
Yeah, especially with As Friends Rust. I will say some of the bands I've been in don't kind of lend themselves as well to that. But As Friends Rust was always, it didn't have a dogmatic kind of theme to the band like Culture maybe did, with straight edge and veganism and kind of lifestyles that were more global, I guess, that we were singing about. But As Friends Rust has always focused more on personal kind of relationships. It's a little bit more self-deprecating. It's a little bit more open or okay with kind of questions not really having good answers and just sort of like facing the problem, but not necessarily offering a solution, just kind of saying we all going through this or what. So I think it's sort of designed for connection. We always, even in the late 90s, we had this kind of, it made it onto some of our merch. Exclude no one was kind of always the overarching like principle where we just wanted our shows to be for everyone, which was important coming off the heels of playing mostly to a bunch of angry straight white males with like machine gun straight edge tattoos. I wanted like to play in front of like everybody, and I wanted everybody to feel like the songs were for them, and that's always been kind of the thing with As Friends Rust. So yeah, that connection is kind of really important to us, and we said it on the last tour that we did last year, where we basically everyone in that room is in the band while we're playing.
So in the beginning, I'm looking at Wikipedia right now, and when you guys start, there's not even a year, maybe a year, and then there's a break, and then you guys get back together again. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, so the first lineup that started in '96 in South Florida was pretty short lived. We played a bunch of shows and we recorded, and then the other folks in the band decided they didn't want to do it anymore. So we broke up. I wasn't too bummed. I had Bertaville Omen and I had recently rejoined Culture.
You're like, I had 20 other bands, so it was fine.
Yeah. I was busy. I was a little bit bummed because I really did feel like we had something really interesting. The guitarist in that first lineup, Henry, wrote some just really cool guitar stuff. I felt like that early stuff had a lot of like Sam I Am and Split Lip kind of in the guitars. I was really enjoying cleaner vocals, even though I was still screaming, like shredding my throat on some of it. I was weaning off of the screaming, which was exciting, and then it stopped. So that was a bummer. But yeah, I was pretty distracted. And what ended up happening is in '97, after Culture did that first tour in Europe, I was so hooked on that I was like, all right, well, I'm leaving more Bertaville Omen, and I'm leaving South Florida. I'm going to go up to Gainesville, where the band had recently they had relocated to Gainesville, and I was like, yeah, I'm just going to move up there, and this is what I'm going to do. So I move up there for Culture, and our guitarist Steve Looker was like, man, I can't stop listening to the As Friends Rust demo. Do you think those guys would care if you maybe started the band back up with like new people up here? And so I talked to them and got their blessing, and we started a second incarnation of the band in Gainesville that did not end up having Steve Looker from Culture in it, but he was kind of the catalyst. So that was about that. That was that year, I would say, between the first lineup breaking up and the second lineup getting kind of up and running. And the second lineup, when we got up and running, we basically wrote one song, recorded it, and then put it on our first record, The Fists of Time, as track one, but all of the following tracks were the demo that the first lineup had recorded a year earlier. So it was kind of just a way to get something out and get started.
Well, then soon after that, it's showing that you have another band lineup change.
Yeah, it was a couple years. That second incarnation, in the very beginning, there were a couple of guitarist changes, but for the most part, that lineup was together until the end of 2000. So from like 98 to the end of 2000, and that's the lineup that I consider kind of the core As Friends Rust lineup, because it was 2 years made it the longest running lineup at that point. But also that's when we did most of our touring, most of our growing, and it was kind of like in the throes of like a lot of drama and kind of turbulent, kind of emotional times for a lot of us. So I think we bonded in a way that like you can only bond if your lives are kind of as shitty as ours were at the time. And we spent a lot of time on the road together. So that kind of made it the core lineup. And then, yeah, at the end of 2000, three of them left at once. And Joe Simmons, the lead guitarist, and I decided to start a third incarnation of the band. So we brought three new people in. That lineup was immediately very productive, very prolific. The previous lineup, we were kind of messy. We wrote and recorded some stuff, but we kind of toured on the same batch of songs for the couple of years that we were around, because we were not focused on writing enough. We never got it together enough to put out a full length. So the third lineup immediately got to work writing a full length, and that was One, our first album. And then right after that, a 5-song EP on Equal Vision, a young trophy band in the parlance of our times. And by the time that came out in early 2002, I had already left the band.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that you were replaced for like a hot second by Adam.
Yep. And that was basically just because while that third lineup was, a lot more productive and we were taking it a lot more seriously, I would say, in terms of songwriting, production quality. We were doing kind of more serious tours, but it was just kind of on an interpersonal level. Maybe I was just still too messy for this kind of tidier, smarter, more professional version of As Friends Rust, but it was just not the band that I loved.
Were you the one who's making all the big decisions? Because I'm like, if you look, I don't know if you've ever gone to your Wikipedia page and looked at, how they do the timeline where it's all the color bars that shows the members and when they came in and left?
Yes, yeah.
So if you look at it, before we start getting, I still want to just really dig into this time period here before we start talking later on about 2008 until now. I mean, it's literally just this diagram of just like a line broken, next one, next guitarist, next drummer, next all this stuff. So it's like you could see that and you could be like, all right, internally something's got to be going on to make this happen. Where if it's another band, if it's just a smooth line, you think that the communication's good and the things are going well. And this just shows like looks like it was just kind of rough.
It was very rough. I will say also the guy who I think has populated most of that information, it's a Canadian guy, Alex. He's been kind of, I don't know, maybe for like going on 20 years now, back to the MySpace days, I think, piecing together the histories of a lot of these bands, not just South Florida bands. He's done it with some Canadian bands too. Just there's he is a very kind of, he's an archivist, and he has been kind of populating that stuff. And sometimes he's so thorough and so meticulous that sometimes I think he'll include information that I think was too much of a footnote to bother including, but to him it's important to telling the whole story. And I've kind of conceded that like he's got to do this the way that he needs to do this, and in the end we'll all be better for it, because there's a lot of information. I mean, I've had to email him and ask him questions about like, hey, 1999, it's been pretty cool to see like all of that stuff, like, oh yeah, that's right, that makes a lot more sense than the way that I had remembered it. But the casualty of that is, yeah, you're going to see some stuff probably in those timelines that convolutes it or makes it a little bit more look a little more confusing than it felt anyway. Yeah, because to me it was like for most of the 98 to 2000 stretch, we had a solid lineup, and from the third incarnation was one solid lineup until I left.
What bands were you touring with? Who were you making friends with? Like, what was going on from like 98 to 2000 before you left?
Okay. 98, right when we're getting started with that second lineup, we get taken out on a US tour, or kind of an East Coast and Midwest tour, by Discount, who were good friends of ours. This is in the mixed bill days. So like, I think no one batted an eye at like, here's this kind of melodic-ish hardcore band touring with a, melodic punk band and poppy, They took us on our first US tour. We took them in turn on their first and our first European tour, which was something that we were afforded without having really paid dues. There was a label in Belgium, Good Life Recordings. They had been putting out Culture and Morning Again stuff. So when the As Friends Rust thing came up, he was very much interested, and he put out that first record that this second lineup only did one song on, the first track. But he put that out, and because it was out, and because Culture and Morning Again were, doing pretty well over there, it just kind of was good timing. The stars kind of aligned, and he released it. Europe liked it, and so that worked out kind of very quickly. So we took Discount with us for most of that tour, and then after that, we did the rest of it with a Swedish band, Purusam.
What year was this again?
This would have been 98. Yeah, so summer of 98, summer, fall maybe, is when Discount takes us out in the US. And then December, January is when we went to Europe. And I remember because a big show on that tour was the New Year's Eve show, because we played kind of across both years. We were, midnight was kind of in the middle of our set, and it was very fun.
Real quick though, that year, this is a very specific show, and I don't know if you're going to remember, but I was in a band at the time, and we were on tour, and we played a show with Discount in Lafayette, Indiana, in this like warehouse area.
And our bassist and I were ripped.
I was like, I was in a band called Lanemeyer, and I was like,
okay, yeah. You guys had a relationship with Discount, didn't you?
Kind of. We played a couple shows with them. I actually interviewed Ryan like years ago, and I think we talked about this. But that was our first tour, and we were like 8 days in, and our van died, so we had to get so we were basically going to that show, and we're just like destroyed. We're just crushed. But I remember with Discount, and I was like, I know on that tour we played with you guys, and I think that was the show.
Yeah, and I remember Lafayette only because we knew while driving there that Lafayette, Indiana is where Axl Rose was from. So we were determined to get to Lafayette and drink Night Train in his honor. Yeah, I think we got pretty messy. But yeah, Lanemeyer. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I was like, I feel like we cross paths with you guys a lot. Or not even a lot, just like I remember on tour just crossing paths or like playing a show or maybe a couple with you, because then I was like, I don't know, it's just something I wanted to just bring up and remember.
Yeah, and it was still, I feel like we were still at a time where there wasn't so much access and so much saturation of music and bands, where if you were in an active band during any given year in the 90s, you did feel like you were part of an ultimately pretty small pool of other active bands.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, like you guys were one of them at that era. I wasn't super familiar with your music. I was familiar that like Lanemeyer is a band that's out there doing something.
Yeah, I think it was because like certain comps and things were coming out, so everyone would be like, oh yeah, I know that name. But there wasn't, like you said, there were a decent amount of bands, but the ones on the road, I felt like there weren't, and the ones that were not in huge labels and on the road, like we all kind of knew of who was out there.
Yeah, and Discount was also kind of a nice bridge for us to that world, because I think we've worked in that kind of poppier punk kind of place in a way that we might not have ever known we did had we just toured with hardcore bands. Yes, that was 98-ish. So we were touring with Discount, Purusam, our friend Keith Welsh in Gainesville. We did a tour with him. We did a few things on our own. And then I would say the next band that we became like buds with would have been Strike Anywhere. A similar thing where they took us on our first full European tour, full US tour. That was our first time out to the West Coast. And then in turn, we took them on their first European tour, which I think by then was probably our third or something. We were really exploiting the European connection as much as we could. So we spent a lot of time there. We found that it was just much easier. Like people already knew us. They already liked us. The drives were shorter and they fed you. And if we had just put more time into touring in the States, it was just, we never seemed to make it work. We just always came home broke and hungry.
Real quick, if you're looking for an explainer video or someone to do motion graphics for your company, check out my company, drive80.com, and you can email me at mike@drive80.com for more info. That's all I got to say. So now back to the interview. What were the crowds like in Europe? Like, how different or similar were they to the States?
I think it was pretty similar. I mean, if you're playing in, kind of a small packed venue, I guess a small packed venue is a small packed venue, anywhere. Could be St. Louis or Berlin. It felt the same, but I would say the difference, the crowds felt the same, the shows themselves felt the same, but the entire affair of touring was much different. Whereas like in the States, it kind of felt like you're on your own. You got the show, figure out how to get there, figure out what you're going to eat that day because no one's going to, feed you, where you're going to sleep because no one's going to put you up. In Europe, it was there's more of there felt like there was more of an infrastructure for touring where you had government subsidized youth centers and community centers. You had squats that had been occupied for decades by people who were doing like really incredible things and had great venues on the ground floors next to record stores and bookstores. And the people who worked there, it'd be like a cooperative kind of situation where they all lived in the building above those businesses. And it was a lot more like figured out. Food every single show, which was huge for us. We were broke. We either didn't have jobs back at home in Gainesville, or we had, just jobs that just enough to pay for the room or the couch that we were renting at the time. So we didn't eat much, I think, looking back stateside. So we really, I really think a big part of us trying to get to Europe as often as possible was the fact that like they fed you.
They were starving.
Yeah.
And you're on Doghouse at this time too, right?
Yeah. So 98, we put that thing out on Good Life, and then Doghouse approaches us. They basically released. Did they do the Fist of Time?
No, Fist of Times is Good Life Recordings, and then they did the self-titled.
Right, which Good Life did in Europe, and then Doghouse did in the States. Different artwork.
How was that? How was being on Doghouse?
Oh, it was great. It was really cool for us just because we loved so many bands that were or had been on Doghouse. It was also pretty cool because in 96, when that first lineup recorded the demo, immediately I sent that demo out to Doghouse and was very politely rejected. Also Jade Tree and Equal Vision. So it was cool to like end up capturing the interest of Doghouse after all, because that was kind of like at the top of the list for labels that we wanted to be on.
What was the song that got them to change their mind?
I don't know, actually. I don't know what they heard. I'm guessing if they ignored the demo, but then they must have paid attention to the Fists of Time, which was essentially the demo with one newer song on it. So maybe they just had more time to kick it around or something.
What was it like? Why did you like being on the label? Like, what did they do for you?
What did they do for us? Man, I don't know, because at the time, you don't really know what a label can do for you, what you can ask for, how you should protect yourself, how royalties work, what's going to be recoupable. Is this, are you giving us money or are you advancing us money? And if you advance us money, what does that mean, like in the long run? We didn't really know any of that stuff. I would say we still kind of largely don't. They just gave us an audience that we wanted, because we felt like we were the Doghouse audience. So if we make music like this and we listen to music on labels like that, then we should have our music on a label like that, because there are probably other people, like us out there who'll dig it.
Did you notice a difference in crowds when you got on the label? Like more people showing up or anything like that?
No, not really, because I think that by the time the self-titled thing came out, which would have been 99, I don't really remember it impacting turnout in the States as much as like the Good Life version impacted turnouts in Europe. But again, we weren't putting as much time or energy into the States. So it's very possible. But we always got the sense that, like, no matter what label we were on stateside, whether it was Doghouse or later Equal Vision, we seemed to always slide under the radar in the States. The US kind of works a little bit differently, where I think there's almost like there are a handful of kind of hyped bands at any given moment, and I think that the vast majority of the scene just cranks their head in the direction of those bands.
Well, there's also a shift too at that time. The whole sound just goes in this new direction with all these, the Victory popular bands and things like that. So the sound just starts to get different and expands more out of like just the punk ska hardcore thing.
Yeah, that's true too. And I think we also like this is something that's always worked against us. And I don't mean this in a like, we're such a unique band, but I think the fact that we've always been a little bit hard to pigeonhole, because if you ask 5 different people what kind of music we play, I think you'll get 5 different answers. It's never really worked out to our benefit. You would think like, oh, that's good. That makes you more of a kind of like singular, proposition. I don't think it works that way. I think most people, they like things kind of easy to categorize. You want to just kind of sum it up with one genre. It's nice and tidy. And I think that we shot ourselves in the foot in that respect. Not that we would have done it any differently. We've always just kind of written what we write. It hasn't made things easy, for example, versus, being a band that's just like, hey, let's start a band that sounds exactly like Turning Point or exactly like Lifetime, or, that is very much ska band, where it's like there's one thing that you can tag it with, and that's better from a marketing perspective or whatever. But that was just never our focus. I don't think we knew we were writing stuff that was hard to pigeonhole. We certainly weren't trying to write stuff that was hard to pigeonhole. I think we all actually had very sort of reductive, oversimplified concepts of what we were, what kind of band we were. We very simply categorized ourselves, but we each did it differently. So in my mind, we're a Dag Nasty, Gorilla Biscuits kind of like faster melodic hardcore band. In our bass player at the time, Caleb, in his mind, it was more jangly, super chunk kind of influenced stuff. James, rhythm guitarist, Lifetime. It was very like that was his concept of kind of the avatar or that kind of space that we were occupying. So I think each of us had very reductive kind of ideas of what we were, but collectively there was a lot of tension between those concepts, and that's what ended up creating something that does sound, I think, like not many other bands, but also has made it very difficult for labels. They don't typically know what to do with us.
What also could also, musically what you're putting out, it's that difference in everyone's viewpoint. It's going to make the sound you have, but then maybe it also creates kind of a friction internally because it's like every side's fighting for a different direction.
Yeah. It creates friction, especially in terms of like the future direction, because I think it's one thing to walk out of a practice having just written a song that is this cool kind of amalgam of all 5 people's influences and styles and ideas of what the band is. But you do start to worry when you're like, all right, Tim, our drummer, is like kind of only listening to Tortoise right now. He doesn't want to play fast. He doesn't want to play heavy. He doesn't seem to like the association with hardcore at the moment. How far is this going to go? This idea to like move in a more cerebral, heady, indie rock direction. Is that something I'm on board with? Because I was like, no, I want that photo. I want to be on the floor with people jumping on my head, singing just gang vocals. I want that connection. I don't want to be an artist. But yeah, I think a lot of that is also, and you're at an age where like you're very dramatic. Everything's very emotionally charged. At least in my case, I was also plenty paranoid. So I think like I over speculated with stuff like that. And it did cause like a lot of bad friction because there was this constant like fear of like everybody's trying to turn this band into something I don't want it to be.
So is that what leads them to now? Did you get kicked out or did you leave when Adam took over?
Well, this is still the 98 to 2000 lineup.
Yeah.
So no, they left. Basically, Tim, our drummer, and James Glayett, our the rhythm guitarist. They've known each other since childhood. They played in bands together long before As Friend Rust, and in a way, they were kind of a package deal. I think when it was probably Tim first decided he was going to leave after an upcoming tour in Europe in 2000. James said, "Well, I'm not going to stay in the band if Tim's not in it, so I'm going to leave too." And that was fairly amicable. The fact that they were staying on, to finish a tour or two first, it gave us some time, so it didn't feel hostile. Caleb, the bass player, during that tour that was to be Tim and James's last tour, he kind of at the last minute decided, fuck this shit, I'm out too. And he left with them. So instead of Joe, Caleb, and I trying to figure out a strategy for the future, it was just Joe and I. But yeah, so they left, and then we pretty quickly replaced them and started working on One on the first album.
Is that when? So is this the time when you guys get on Equal Vision? 2002 was when you put out a Young Trophy Band in the parlance of our times.
That was Equal Vision may have started.
Oh, that was a single EP.
Yeah, that was an EP. One came out in 2001 on Doghouse, and in Europe on Defiance Records. That was first. I think that was maybe what got Equal Vision's attention. And then they approached us, and we said, "Well, we're on Doghouse, but I think we're allowed to do an EP." We made sure that we could, and we did that EP. And then yeah, I quit. I think like a week before they released it.
Why'd you quit?
Because by then, with those new people, the band just had turned into something that I just wasn't feeling. That's kind of the I referenced earlier, missing the mess of that kind of second incarnation. It was a little bit of missing the mess, but it was also, I think, just I didn't have the same history with these guys. So even though I mean, we brought in one guy, Floyd, who I had been in Culture with. We were good friends. Tom, the bass player that we brought in, he and I had been in Bird of Ill Omen in '96, along with Joe. So there was familiarity there. But once you're actually on the road and in the studio, you start to really realize, like, man, I don't really know these people. Not in the way that I knew those other guys. And it just felt a little superficial. It felt kind of like the shell of the band that it was. Like we, on the outside, we were doing everything the same or better. We finally got a good recording, finally wrote an album. We were finally doing better tours, but it was a little bit soulless because there was no real history. We hadn't, starved and narrowly avoided dying, dozens of times together, like the other guys, like we had.
Wait, what was one of those stories?
Oh man, we had really rough tours. We were kind of trouble magnets somehow. It felt like.
Is that based on like just out of circumstance, or were you guys kind of like deviants a little bit?
We were deviants a little bit. I mean, there were definitely some troublemakers in the band, but for the most part, I think it was just that we ended up doing really weird tours in really weird places. We got vans broken into. We had guns pulled on us. We've had run-ins with like Polish mafia who made us repeat an entire set to an empty room.
What?
Yeah, we had a lot of really weird experiences.
Wait, have you ever told that Polish mafia story?
Yeah, I have. It's basically.
Oh my God.
So, well, the story actually starts like a night or two earlier, also in Poland, where we played a show, and we got the promoter stiffed us. He either didn't pay or he paid like way less than the guarantee. We moved on, defeated. This is back when, if you toured Europe, there was a good chance that at some point you'd lose a lot of your money to opportunistic border patrol folks, or Strike Anywhere. When we toured in Europe with them, at one point they got pulled over on the side of a highway in Italy, and they had to sit on the ground while cops with machine guns kind of kept them sitting, and went through all their stuff, and I think took all their cash or something. Like, things like that happened sort of routinely. You'd hear about. We moved on from getting stiffed, and then we end up playing another show in Poland at this kind of like, the way that I remember it was sort of underground. Like, you took some steps down from the sidewalk. It was like an underground kind of speakeasy bar, not a punk bar. This place was like nice. It had nice tables and chair. Well, it had tables and chairs for starters, but it was like the only people that were in there were old, and there weren't very many of them. It was pretty empty. There were like a couple of old couples sitting at a couple of tables, and then us. And there wasn't a hardcore kid or a punk to be found anywhere, aside from the promoter, who was, just kind of, I think, standing, kind of hanging out at the bar, talking to these other, older guys. But he was like a tattooed hardcore kid, so he had set the show up. There wasn't there was not a single kid there. So we played to a bunch of tables in this very upscale kind of speakeasy, and we were like, all right, let's just play and get the fuck out of here. So we played our set. This guy came over to us, this like gray beard, gray hair, trench coat, very sort of stereotypical kind of, if you think of like Eastern, European kind of mob guy or mafia guy. He came over and he was like, play more. And we said, we don't have more. That was everything. And he's like, then play again.
Oh my God.
Which is crazy, even if the room is like packed, Yeah. But it's a lot crazier in an empty room with people who seem just annoyed that we're even playing at all. But basically, what he decided was, if we're paying you what we're paying you, we got to get our money's worth. So dance, monkey. It was kind of what it felt like.
Wow.
Entertain us. And we were like, we're not going to do that. We're just going to pack up and get out of here. And he moved his coat to the side to point at a gun in his belt and said, you play again. And we were all like, okay, shit. From the top, boys,
Oh my God.
We had that. We had, there was a time where the drummer's brother and I were in the van to get something. I won't get into everything that caused it, but basically, while inside the van, a mob of people shook the van, smashed every window, glass is raining down on us as we're laying on two separate benches. And then one guy reaches in through the window, points a gun at my head, reaches it over the seat, points it at his head, back to mine, back to his, before dispersing miraculously before anyone got shot. That was outside of Paris. We had a lot of incidents like that. We had weird run-ins with angry skinheads who, locked the doors of the venue in an attempt to kind of just beat our asses without us being able to escape. We had a lot of vans broken into, stereos stolen. Tours were pretty rough.
Why did you want to keep going back to Europe, besides the eating part?
Man, I don't know. I guess, honestly, we had nothing else going on. It was the one thing that we could do that made us feel like we were doing something good.
So when you quit the band, did you kind of feel a little bit of, I guess, I know, I don't really, I feel like this is a dumb question, but like the relief of, no, because you liked going over there. So there wouldn't be a relief of not having to go tour and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I always loved touring. I was happiest at the time just on the road. So no, there was no, when I quit, well, okay, by the time I quit, yeah, I would say that there was a bit of a relief, because while I was happiest on the road, I had not been happy on the road with that final lineup. And things were starting to happen for the band, where we were just attracting some interest from publications, labels, managers, whatever. And it all felt like very, this is the point you're supposed to build your band up to. This is where things start to take off. To me, that was kind of much like the idea of touring with the guys in Shai Hulud. That just represented kind of the beginning of a whole nother chapter of like drama and discord. So I think that I started to panic when As Friends Rust started to pick up, because it was picking up with the wrong lineup in my mind. Nothing against those guys. I'm very proud of those two releases, and I think the guys in the band today, who are mostly that second core lineup, they like those songs. We play those songs. It's we don't look back at that era of the band with any like shame or anything. I think like that's some of our best material. It was on those releases, but it just wasn't fun.
Were you paying attention to the band when you left and just kind of seeing what they were up to until they broke up soon after?
No, I've got this I'm pretty skilled at leaving a band and just completely tuning them out, with the exception of, I would say, like the first Shai Hulud 7-inch that Chad sang on. I think that was kind of the first and last time I was curious to see what somebody did after I left, especially with songs I had written. But after that, I just sort of never paid attention. Maybe it was a competitive caddy kind of thing. Maybe it was just I was too busy and distracted, or just didn't give a shit about what that band was doing because I wasn't into that whole sort of thing anymore. I don't know what it is, but yeah, when I left, I did go see them once in Gainesville with Adam singing, and I sang along. You know, I was an adult about it, a good sport. But I don't think that lasted very long before they ended up kind of morphing into a different band.
There's a huge gap between that and then from 2008, is that right, until present
Yeah.
day? And again, like I said earlier, the line is just like a smooth line of color, like just a couple lines leading up until currently. So it sounds like it almost feels that the left side internally would make someone feel uneasy, and then this diagram from 2008 on makes it feel like internally it's been more of a smoother ride.
Yeah, it has. It has. So I left in 2002, and I kind of checked out until 2000. Well, honestly, I'd sort of checked out until 2012 probably, but in 2008 we did a reunion tour. In theory, have been a band ever since. We only because we would from time to time get back together to play a festival or a kind of one-off show or a little tour in Japan or something. We weren't writing anything new. We weren't playing anything new at shows. We were kind of just I guess like a nostalgia kind of act. And that was fine. It was fun. People who like us don't seem to mind at all. I think they're more than happy to just get to see us play the songs that they know, especially if they didn't think they'd ever get to see us play those songs again. But after a while, it started to feel sort of silly, where it was like, we can't do this forever. So we had been kind of tossing songs around. We never found a good workflow for recording them remotely, because by now we're all, all over the country. It took us a while to find our way to kind of do it effectively. But we had been talking about writing new stuff, threatening to write new stuff for many, many years, until it finally just kind of came together. I think the pandemic, we did a couple of songs right at the start of the pandemic, which, I mean, we started them before, but I did my vocals kind of the weekend that everything shut down. I think by then people had just kind of figured out how to record at home better. It didn't feel as daunting as it maybe once had to record remotely from afar. So we started saying, all right, people liked those two songs. Let's go through our, by now, piles of songs that we have in a Dropbox folder, and let's pick some of them and let's put out an album. Because all I ever wanted from this kind of second lineup was to do an album. And I think that's why doing one with the third lineup was so like, it was just imperative to me because it was kind of my way of like sticking it to the other guys. Like, look how easy this was. Why did, like, we were together for 2.5, 3 years and like we could barely write new shit. Look how quickly this album came together. But then it always bothered me because it wasn't with them. That's the lineup I wanted to write an album with. So we finally did.
So when you get back together, just kind of go back to the 2008 thing. I feel like that was the point where the scene kind of gets rid of the fashion show, and it's the bands like you guys, that sound is starting to be the more acceptable sound, I guess to say, where it's like, oh, okay, we can do this again. We don't have to worry about wearing super tight jeans and shit like that and having our hair done. Like, did you getting it back in 2008, was there any part of that being like, now's the time, or it was just like, I just feel like fucking doing this?
No, we just felt like doing it. I was living in Michigan and didn't have much going on. It was just a good timing. This is kind of a weird thing too. We come from a place, I think, sonically to most people, that is very late 90s, early aughts. Our sound. I guess there's, a type of melodic, sort of poppy, post-hardcore kind of, emo tinged, whatever it is. We come from that place to most people. We are a grade or a hot water music or a Boy Sets Fire, maybe. Those are usually the bands that, like, anytime someone would say you're one of my favorite bands, their other favorite bands were those bands. Always. Maybe like Silent Majority or Fast Break or something, but we were in that kind of weird little pocket of like those bands where we were coming from a hardcore place, but there was a lot of melody, and we sort of sat at the intersection of emo, hardcore, post-hardcore, punk, and whatever. Although I think all of those bands kind of executed differently, we all kind of occupied that same sort of like mystery space, or like confusing kind of intersection. But the thing is, we were never very attuned to that kind of like as music fans, as listeners, as record buyers, none of us were into that stuff. I think we kind of our musical growth for the type of hardcore that we played sort of plateaued at those references, that I mentioned earlier, like for James' Lifetime, and for me, Turning Point and Dag Nasty and Gorilla Biscuits. So it was a very weird situation to be in, where we belonged to this very late 90s, early 2000s space, this musical space that was very much of those times, but without really knowing or having any real deep kind of connection to those times, because we were all pulling from stuff from a few years earlier, the stuff that kind of made us. So we always felt a little bit, I shouldn't say I always felt a little bit at odds with the scene that we were in, because I didn't listen to any of that stuff. I didn't necessarily like it. Where I saw things heading in the late 90s to early 2000s, kind of, no shade to these bands who are very talented and very hardworking and very good, probably much better than us. But like, when that whole wave of like Thrice, Thursday kind of stuff started to roll in, I no longer recognized the hardcore scene. I didn't know what that shit was, what it was doing there. I mean, that's not to say like I was, like only listening to Madball or something. Like I wasn't at all. I was actually listening to very little hardcore of any persuasion at the time. But I just, even though I wasn't listening to it, I still could look on and recognize some things. But I didn't know what that was anymore. That whole very slick, very polished, and I would say that, like, kind of us joining Doghouse, the Doghouse we were excited to join was the Doghouse of Christmas Past. And kind of right around the time that we got on Doghouse was when they started to become a label that did things that were not exciting to us, that catered to a very current permutation of post emo punk hardcore stuff that just wasn't of any interest to me. I felt kind of like an outsider before even leaving the band. I would, and that also, that also coincided with that third lineup. Was like, by the time the third lineup happened, we were starting to tour with bands like Further Seems Forever, who, again, like very talented band, friends of ours from South Florida. Can't knock what they did. It wasn't what I was listening to. I don't even know what to call it, what kind of music it is, but it was certainly not the, like, I was happier just touring with hardcore bands or Discount or Strike Anywhere, where it was just like, it's fun and it can be a little bit sloppy and it's really just about the connection with the audience and all of that stuff. I feel like kind of that third lineup with the album and that last EP, the way that our, like, the whole shape was starting to change, the shape of the scene, the shape of our band, and then the bands that we were starting to go out on the road with were starting to be those bands that I didn't understand. I didn't get that were coming from a place that I no longer recognized as a place that I was from. And so that whole thing was just kind of disheartening. So by the time I left in 2002, I was just like, you know what? I don't want to be in a band with these guys anymore. I don't want to be leveling up. If leveling up means we're just going to be playing shows with Coheed and Cambria and getting this hot shit producer to do our record and trying to get a song on the radio, which is very much the intention of, that was sort of the mission statement for that last lineup. Not mine, but it was that had become, I think, the prize. It was, I remember there being a practice where, and I won't name any names, but it was said by somebody in the band at the time, newly in the band at the time, Jimmy Eat World meets Incubus. That's what our next stuff should sound like. And I remember right away just being like, I'm going to end up quitting my own fucking band.
Oh my God. That's pretty much exactly what was going on at that time. Like that.
Yeah. And hey, I like Jimmy Eat World.
Well, I'm thinking they were probably saying, like, Bleed American mixes with Morning View, because those were like some of the hit records from that time.
Yeah, and you can hear, I think in those last couple of releases we did, you can hear a move toward that on the music side. Even weirder shit, like I would say we flirted kind of heavily at a couple of moments on those last couple of releases with, like, even like nu metal stuff. I think it was like more like there were some System of a Down kind of influences working their way. They were like weird influences, and again, like I've always appreciated the unintentional product of clashing influences. This was starting to feel intentional. This was starting to feel like we really want to be a certain type of band that does a certain type of tour with other bands and is in a certain world that to me just was starting to feel like very self-important.
Yeah, that was, there's definitely a lot of people who felt the same way. I think the things that we were all used to completely changed, and we were like, what is this new thing? And it almost became like I fucking hate this, and I hate what it's doing to everything. And then then it spikes, and then it levels out towards like 2008, I think, like I was saying, like right when you guys started again.
Yeah, if it did, I wasn't aware, because I think I had pretty successfully tuned the whole thing out. I left the band early 2002, and I just stopped everything. I grew my hair long. I listened to a lot. I smoked a lot of weed, and I listened to a lot of Zeppelin for years. And I still listened to old shit, but I had been pretty soured to the whole thing because, yeah, I didn't recognize it. I didn't like the direction it was heading. So I checked out. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized, oh shit, hardcore kept going and it got good again. I missed a lot of kind of more exciting stuff that was happening in the early 2000s because of having checked out, but there was good shit happening that was not in that kind of thricey world. But I didn't know because I had already just kind of walked away. So in 2008, the way that the reunion happened was, and this is kind of cool because there's a little full circle here. I'm in Michigan at this point. I moved in 2006. I don't know anybody. So if a band comes through town, I'm like, yeah, I'll go see. I saw that Against Me was coming through town. So I would go see Against Me every now and then when they would roll through Detroit or something. And I saw them. It must have been 2007, I guess. And Andrew, the bass player, yeah, was like, when are we going to get an As Friends Rust reunion? And I kind of took that back to the guys and was like, just sort of jokingly, but everybody said that they were down. Let's do it. So that's how the 2008 reunion happened. And then, we just sort of like, we took down the closed for business sign. We were no longer like not a band, but we also weren't active. We took down the closed sign, but we didn't like unlock the door. We just kind of kept like, it was like by appointment only.
Well, it's almost like you took the Lifetime approach.
Is that what they did?
Well, I mean, they came 2006. They played a reunion. They did a show in 2 shows in Philly and then 1 Asbury Park, which I luckily got to see. It was fucking sick. And then they recorded a new album at that point, which is pretty good. And then since then, they just kind of pop up and just kind of do their thing, and that's about it. It's almost like just, I don't know, it's under your control more at that point because you get to say yay or nay, and you can also still go have other things you can do instead of being like, this is the only thing I have. If it fails, I'm fucked, and there's the pressure on top of that, and just it causes everything to be more tense.
Right. Yeah.
I guess before when I was talking about Doghouse and what they did, you guys are on N Hits Records. What's like the difference in being on a label now compared to back then?
Oh, well, it's easier to communicate. That's one thing. Back then, none of us had computers. The way that we would communicate with the label would be like Caleb and I would wake up, go get a coffee, walk to University of Florida campus library, get on one of their computers, sneak onto one of their computers to check our email, or I think even still just pulling letters out of a PO box. And we didn't have cell phones. We certainly didn't have ways to make long distance calls without it costing an arm and a leg. It was very prohibitive back then to network beyond your local kind of scene. And it's kind of crazy now looking back and realizing that we all did it in spite of how prohibitive it was. We all booked tours that somehow mostly worked out and dealt with labels. And I don't even really know how. We did, prior to the 2 songs in 2020, we started to hit up some labels saying, hey, we're going to do some new stuff. I think it was kind of a bit of like the band who cried wolf, because since 2008, since that first reunion, since, getting a social media presence and whatever, we jumped the gun several times, excitedly announcing new songs coming soon, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like there were a lot of stops and starts along the way to where it sort of became a joke. That was 2008. And we've got people in 2018 saying like, hey, whatever happened with the new stuff? We didn't know how to make it happen. And we were busy. This is our 30s at this point. So we're in that phase where you start careers. Some of those guys were already starting families or were like about to. People are starting to get married. Things are a little different. So we're busy, and we're trying to navigate like being in a band at all with having these new responsibilities, let alone being in a band with people spread across the country. It's all new territory. We made the mistake of kind of announcing new stuff and just never delivering. We did that, I think, too many times. And in the run up to 2020, we knew we were serious about recording some new stuff. No one else did, understandably. So we hit up some labels trying to get some interest, and there was none. I think we actually even hit up End Hits. And I should confirm that, because that would be the 3rd label we ended up on after a rejection. So, but yeah, I remember, I remember like very vividly getting the sense that like no one trusted us. Equal Vision, I had been in touch with. Understandably, they didn't trust us, probably especially me, because they got a little bit burned that EP came out and there was the band that recorded it was no longer a thing. So that's a waste of people's time and money. But I mean, you're dealing with people at a volatile age to begin with, the people in those bands. And in a scene where like they're probably going to be more volatile than most, just because of the nature of kind of what attracted us to that kind of music. So it's quite a risk, I would imagine, being in a label that puts out any kind of punk or hardcore stuff or just youth, created music, because you're dealing with messes. But we were that mess, and I don't think it left a good taste in their mouth, and they didn't trust it, and it kind of we seemed to not be very interesting to anybody. So we did that 2-song 7-inch on our friend's label, and then I think that gave people a sense of, okay, these guys might do more. They still tour every now and then. Their tours seem to go pretty well. People still seem interested in them. People seem really interested in these new couple of songs. And I think that's kind of when End Hits came back to us and said, hey, if you're working on a record, let's talk. And we had been aware of End Hits for a while. They've got a good roster. Actually, I think because we were aware of them, we approached them prior to the 2020 songs, which is how we were able to get Rejected in the first place. But yeah, so now we're in 2023, if we skip over those couple of songs, and we finally, 22 years later, release our second full length.
How many how many shows or tours have you done since this new record came out?
We did a tour in Europe.
Is it less scary now?
It's less scary. Yeah, much less scary. Especially when you have like everything is just kind of more together now, more lawless, or less lawless. I would say that like with the advent of the internet and smartphones, it's gotten a little harder to have a totally botched tour. But no, it was really fun. We went. The record came out. I forget when. A couple months maybe before the tour of Europe. We went. It was October, and we were with Calling Hours, which is Popeye from Farside, his new band. It was originally going to be with Don't Sleep, Dave Smalley's band. He couldn't make it. Turns out all the guys in Don't Sleep are all the guys in Calling Hours, with the exception they just swapped one legendary hardcore singer for another, and they've got Calling Hours. So we were just like, yeah, I mean, you guys already booked tickets. We'll just do it with Calling Hours instead. So that was super fun, because they were still relatively new at the time. They had only played a few shows. So I think those were our first shows since the record. And then after that, we played 2 more. We played the Fest at the end of October, and then we played Brooklyn in November, also with Calling Hours. And that's it since the new record.
How many songs on the new record do you play?
3 maybe, which there is almost half the record. It's a pretty short record.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought, like, if as you said full length, I was like, I see it more as an EP. I don't know. I think if I see 6, 7 songs, I always think EP.
We've just put out too many EPs to want to say we did another EP. So we're just kind of
calling it a double album.
Double album. No, we I don't know. I'm still of the mindset that an EP is basically anything that's more than a single, which I think is like 1 or 2 songs in my mind, a really good A side and a shitty B side, but less than an album. So I think I always felt like if you got 3 or 5 songs, that's an EP. Yeah, I'm just trying to justify it here. We knew it was going to be sort of a sticky thing, and we were just like, fuck it, we're calling it an album. Don't call it anything else.
I kind of appreciate when bands nowadays are just writing, like, they're not like, we have to, for us, we got a couple songs we like, now we have to write more to make these, to put them out. I like that bands can just put out less now, because I like that urge of wanting, or people wanting more, or like people wanting more from you, or for me as a fan, like wanting more, but like sometimes it's like you shouldn't get it.
Yeah, and we sort of had that feeling, because we've always done everything wrong, and this just kind of felt more like, you know what? it was originally going to be 8 songs. We threw one out at the last minute, and we were like, do we replace it? No, 7 songs. Is that an album? Sure, we'll just say it is. It's very on brand for us to kind of. It took us 22 years to write an album, and is it really an album? Just feels kind of still in tribute to that sort of mess that this lineup is. But we're getting better. I also think I don't think that a lot of people necessarily have the attention span for a 10, 12 song record anymore. It's too easy to switch to something else. You don't have to walk across the room and pull a tape out and pop it in, rewind it to the. It's just it's too easy to kind of like toggle between like one record and another, one release or band and another. So I think 7 is good. I mean, we basically were like, would we want to listen to any more of this than that? Probably not. I think that's where I tap out. So let's not make anyone suffer longer.
Between Furnace Fest and Fest, which one's your favorite one to play?
Oh man, probably Fest. Just because I would say that overall, I'm probably less into the music at Fest than Furnace Fest.
Oh wait, you're less into Fest music than the Furnace Fest lineup.
A little bit, yeah, because I guess that sort of like what's become sort of known as fest punk,
beer punk.
Yeah, pizza tattoo punk.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not really my scene, I guess. I know that Gainesville is sort of the epicenter of that stuff, or sort of it's not really my thing, I guess. Just that sort of gruff bonfire punk stuff isn't necessarily my thing. There's some good bands in there, but I think Fest tips pretty heavily in that direction. But they do always have like they had Government Issue, they have like Gorilla Biscuit. They mix it up. There's some really great bands that play. What it makes it for me is just kind of it's an opportunity to see people that I haven't seen in a long time, since I now live in Michigan. But if I were an attendee, I would probably be more inclined to go to Furnace Fest, just because I think there are more bands I'd be interested in seeing. The year that we played, there was Pedro the Lion, I think, was playing like Control from start to finish. Sunny Day Real Estate played. Nothing. There were some pretty good bands. Strike Anywhere. But there's also, they do a lot of kind of Christian late 90s, early 2000s sounding stuff that like I don't even know about. I don't know who those bands are. I've seen their posts and everyone would be like, Bread. There was a band with Bread in the name. Breadwinner? Bread something? I don't know. But people were losing their minds that this band was playing, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to assume it's like a Christian band from 2005. And
wait, do you mean The Bled?
No, Bread. I remember Bread was in the name.
Okay, I'm like literally on their Instagram right now, checking out like old.
It would have been either the 21 or 22.
Okay.
But yeah, there are a lot of those kind of bands. So I don't know, actually. I'm not sure which.
Well, like what crowds do you get? Like which are the more fun crowds to play to who get as involved at either of those for you guys?
That'd be Fest. Because again, it's kind of like how we found ourselves clumped in with like the Thursdays, in the late 90s, early 2000s. We're also very clumped in with hot water music, possibly just because we're from Gainesville, but also because I do think we kind of accomplish a similar thing in being kind of at the intersection of a few different subgenres. I didn't understand that Thursday Thrice scene, but we made sense to people who did understand it. And I don't necessarily understand the whole fest punk scene, but we make sense to people who do.
I think it's because you guys are you were a Gainesville band. I think people will lump you into that.
I think so too. And I hear people a lot of times kind of lazily just say, they're from Gainesville. They have that kind of hot water music, so, and I always feel like it's pretty lazy. It's also sort of to be expected, because a lot of bands that came out of Gainesville did very decidedly have a hot water music bent. I always felt like we were just kind of more of a hardcore band. And it's interesting, like to see what people hear when they hear us, because some people only hear the melody. They only hear the hooks. They only hear the poppiness. Some people on the newer stuff only hear the metallic elements. We've gotten a lot of comments about like, yeah, it's a lot more metallic and Damien's Bruce Dickinson shit, or like uh, David Lee Roth, kind of attitude, and Joe is doing little Van Halen like solos. People always hear something very different. But I always felt like the comparison to Hot Water Music was lazy. We make very much sense being from the same scene and playing shows together, but I don't think we sound at all alike. Any more than I think, like Avail is another band that makes total sense on a show with Hot Water Music. Don't sound like Hot Water Music.
Well, aren't you guys doing a tour? Or you did do the tour? Or is there a tour coming up with Hot Water Music and Quicksand?
Yeah, that's coming up. That'll be in November.
Oh, wow. Damn, you guys are really advertising this early.
Early, yeah.
Jeez. I guess you have to do that these days. Like, I'm always thinking,
I was surprised. It was like, this is going up tomorrow. Oh, shit.
you're
Really?
like, the tour's in 2026. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, but it's kind of cool because and I've been listening to like the new songs that they've been dropping for their new album a lot, and yeah, I can hear there's a through line. There. I mean, we are all kids ultimately who grew up on a mix of hardcore and then stuff like Seaweed and Sam I Am, which I think is very present in Hot Water Music's music and pretty present in ours. I think if people listen for it, there's a lot of Sam I Am and Seaweed kind of stuff in our stuff, which I would venture to say, to circle back to your Sponge comparison earlier, I would almost say that like in the right context, Sponge could be sort of positioned as a Seaweed.
yeah, I can see that.
There's that sort of 90s-ish kind of alt rock meets kind of melodic sort of skate punk, or whatever it was called at the time. We've got a lot of that. They've got a lot of that. You can hear it in a lot of the guitars, but I think the ultimate kind of the execution is very different. And I'm still always chasing that photo. There's still an element of like very direct confrontational connection.
Well, it's funny because I said like your Instagram is just like loaded with photos of that photo you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably there's probably a reason I repost those ones. But yeah, that's pretty cool. We're incredibly excited for that tour. We've got a lot of history with the Hot Water Music guys. Caleb, who was our bass player in the middle lineup, and then again since we reformed in 2008 until 2019, he passed away in 2021. He was, prior to joining As Friends Rust, he had been a big part of those days in the Hot Water Music camp, touring with them. He was kind of their sort of unofficial, like fifth member. They've got a lot of history with him there. We have that kind of shared Caleb thing, and I think in a sense, kind of us doing this tour together is maybe a little bit in honor of him, because I think it's the tour he always wanted to happen, but we never got around to doing. And then of course Quicksand.
I love Quicksand. I know I'm jumping back, but I totally missed this earlier. That second lineup, when you first get together and then you break up and then you get back, or then you start the second round. Jason Black was in the band for a hot second.
So this is an example of Alex from Canada kind of maybe including stuff that I would have left out of the story because they were too fleeting. But yeah, at the point where Steve Looker from Culture proposed starting a new incarnation of As Friends Rust that he wanted to play guitar in, I think he was living with Jason Black at the time, so they had both been listening to the demo a lot, and Jason at one point was slated to play bass. I don't think we ever practiced, even with Steve. I think that Steve remembers practicing with him, not necessarily Jason. But yeah, that was kind of that's what the lineup was going to be when it was first proposed, but that's not the lineup that ended up coming together.
Cool, dude. All right, so before I wrap this up, is there a story you've always wanted to tell that you've never told before in an interview that you'd like to tell now? I feel like I got a couple of them earlier with the Polish mafia, even though I think you did say you told that story before.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a of another tour story that we've kind of forgotten.
It could be a tour story. It could be like a show you played. It doesn't have to be like anything detrimental to your character or anything like that.
No, I mean, as you can tell, like there's no off switch once I start talking. So I think I've pretty much told everything that I can possibly remember, which feels like less and less with each passing year. Yeah, no, nothing specific.
What would be, I've never asked this before, it just is very relevant to this. What would be like two or three entry point songs, just because you have people listening to this when it comes out, that anyone can open up Spotify and just start playing something. So what would be like two or three entry point songs for your band where you're like, I think these would get you to get who we are pretty fast?
Okay, I'll give one from kind of, well, I wouldn't say each incarnation. This is basically like second, third, and second again, which is the current. Coffee Black has become kind of our signature song. I don't know why. It's a very sloppy recording. It's a fun song. It's a fast song. It again kind of encompasses that theme of like inclusion that I think people really appreciated at the time, because it lyrically basically it's kind of an anthem for like others.
So anyone listening, that's the fourth song on the self-titled and Spotify. All the way, so if you do, so you see all albums, scroll all the way down. I was trying to help people get there fast, like easier. Yeah, scroll all the way down, song 4 on the self-titled. Okay.
So Coffee Black, and that's from the second lineup, we were rawer, we were sloppier, we didn't care about production quite as much as the previous or latter lineups, or as we do now. But it's very much kind of that. I think that embodies a lot of the spirit of the brand of the band. The next song I would say is from the third lineup. The first song on one, We On Some Next Level Shit. I think lyrically is kind of pretty representative of our outlook when we aren't addressing like kind of personal stuff. It's kind of looking kind of inward at the scene rather than just vague external kind of concepts. And then from the new album, I would say it's a bit of a different direction, but Final Form, the first song on the new album, or Positive Mental Platitude, those both feel thoroughly As Friends Rust, but a little bit evolved. And I think they'll give you a good sense of like our sound, which a lot of it is in the guitars, and I think that those songs both have some really signature As Friends Rust stuff happening.
Yeah, it's funny with those songs is I'm looking at the plays, the number of plays on all the songs you said, and all of those are the top downloaded ones on Spotify.
They were our first two singles, to be fair.
Ah, there we go.
Or maybe I think it was our first and third single. Yeah, Positive Mental Platitude was first.
No, not those two. Like the Coffee Black.
Coffee Black.
Coffee Black has got 110,000 listens, and then We On Some Next Level Shit's got 140,000. So they're the most played on those two albums, and then on the newest album, those first two songs are the most played as well. But that does help when you put them out as a single.
But yeah, I think those would be good starting points. It's I don't know. We're working on some new stuff too, which I'm pretty interested in seeing how that all comes together. But yeah, we tend to the sound from one incarnation to the next changed drastically as well. The first incarnation I mentioned was like had some split lip Sam I Am kind of guitar stuff. There was a lot of screaming. I was still coming off of that, so like there was a lot of screaming, but I started doing clean vocals. That second incarnation with Coffee Black was a lot more scrappy and rough and raw and fast. So it was we were more of like there was a lot more punk spirit, I would say, in that band, but also that kind of a little bit of the jangly sort of like super chunkiness kind of interwoven in there. The jump from that to the third, the Incubus Jimmy Eat World lineup was pretty drastic too. If you listen to a song like We On Some Next Level Shit, it's not too much of a departure. The chorus is a little bit maybe new metal radio rock of the time, but it still feels like an As Friends Rust song. But there are other songs on that record and on the Equal Vision EP that were kind of a departure. But we've always managed to end up sounding like As Friends Rust, even if we don't sound like any other As Friends Rust.
So very hot water music. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, they do that, right? Yeah.
No, I was just saying because everyone compares you to just being a
Oh,
Gainesville band.
yeah, even when we sound like hot water music or Thursday.
Yeah. All right, man. So on that note, I'll ask two questions before I ask the last one. What would you like to plug? It could be about you, it could be about a friend, it could be about both.
Oh, uh, I'll plug a few things real quick.
Do it.
Okay, so yeah, well, the obvious one would be we have a new album out. It's not super new at this point. Came out last year, but it's the first one in 22 years. So anybody checking this out, if you're curious, the album is called Any Joy. It is a 7-song album. We're very proud of it. So there's that. What else? Joe, our guitarist, our lead guitarist, Joey Van Halen, Joe Simmons, he just opened a new brewery in Gainesville called Grand Scheme. So if you're in the area, roll through. I do a solo project, Damien Dunn. Yeah. So Damien Dunn also released a second album right before the As Friends Rust album called Total Power. If you just want to be bummed out. What else? I got some death metal. I got a death metal project called Ecstasis, Ekstasis.
Casket Glomrot?
Oh, Casket. Yeah. That is with the primary music writer performer from Ecstasis. It's basically death metal vocals over 80s hair metal glam rock. So we're calling the genre glam rock.
That's awesome.
It's got some different stuff going on.
All right, man. Last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Well, I would say and this might be the obvious, but I think just the entire idea of there's an entrepreneurial spirit in the DIY nature of this scene that from coming up, at an age where I had no money and I had no resources and I had to bum rides or whatever, you get resourceful and you get crafty about making things without the appropriate means. So you figure out where you can steal photocopies and where you can steal paper and where you can do zines and do layouts outside of the normal kind of ways. And I think that has kind of crept into. It's still a part of everything I do. There's kind of a DIY kind of handmade aspect to everything I do. I still do the design for the band. I work in a corporate design atmosphere, but I definitely bring kind of a DIY entrepreneurial kind of irreverent sort of approach to it. Just because that's one of the beautiful things about that scene is like you don't have to ask permission or go through red tape. There's no bureaucracy to put something out. You find a photocopier and then you go to a show and you hand them out and you've just disseminated your half-cocked, malformed, ideas to a whole bunch of people virtually for free. So I think that's it. I think it's the idea that kind of I think one day we'll kind of look back and realize, like, when we talk about DIY, it wasn't just bands figuring out how to record by themselves and putting out demo tapes and making zines, but on a bigger level, the fact that like we created a whole economy and a whole like supply chain and a whole kind of network of like for live performance and stuff outside of the margins is pretty profound. It's pretty crazy. And I always I think that's the thing that trips me up when throughout my life, people, normal people, aunts, uncles, kind of people who are like, so when you do those tours, like who puts that together? How does that happen? And then I have to go kind of explain the whole, at first it sounds very professional, the booking agency kind of thing and the promoters and guarantees and stuff. But then you remember that like, these are booking agencies that only book hardcore bands, and they're promoters who only book hardcore bands, and they're guarantees that kind of they're not crazy, but they're enough to keep you kind of like on the road and moving and be able to like help you get from one town to the next. And I don't know, I find the fact that like we kind of built an entire economy, not a profitable one necessarily, but like one that does not rely on the channel, the more mainstream kind of channels, to be really kind of cool and impressive. And I think like I still sort of think like that, where if I'm posed with a problem, I'm always trying to solve it in a way that like doesn't require me going through proper channels that will bottleneck and complicate everything and kind of cast a light on it that I don't want on it. I don't know if that's really, I don't think that I'm answering that very succinctly or comprehensively, but
No, no, you are. That's a lot of people agree with the DIY thing. So I think you've nailed it with that.
yeah, I mean, it is the obvious answer. It's like, but I think that DIY is just it's a much bigger thing than we sometimes realize or give ourselves credit for in this community. And I don't know how this fits into it, but there's been a part of me that's also been thinking with the advent of, streaming services and with all of this kind of immediate access, something that I see that's a little bit frustrating or demoralizing, I guess, just as a fan of the scene is, and this is nothing new. I mean, we've always done this. This was the deal when it was the Black Flags and Social Distortions. It was the deal when it was like Earth Crisis and Strife. They're always hype bands that will eclipse all of the other bands doing things, or hype labels that eclipse other labels doing things. But now that you have such easy, immediate access to national or international kind of bands or labels or whatever, I think it's kind of at the expense of like the local scene. I think local scenes are suffering because it's so easy to tap into bigger scenes that are outside of your locality. So I've been thinking lately that like it'd be interesting to see a shift where hardcore fans are basically like, you know what? Fuck national bands. We're gonna invest all of our money, all of our resources, whatever we'd spend on buying records or like whatever going to shows, only on local bands, and see if we can build kind of a thriving local hardcore economy, where, because it's only until you start like really treating those local bands like their gel. I think that by focusing your effort on like on a more kind of hyper local level, bands will thrive. They'll get better. There'll be more kind of capital going around, on a local level, and bands will be able to like write better songs and do better recordings and play bigger shows, and more people will book and more venues will hold shows. And I don't know. I get a little worried sometimes that all of the like focus on bigger hyped acts is sometimes at the expense of like local acts, which is kind of where it should all kind of start. And I'm always saying that because I think I've noticed scenes. Actually, Ann Arbor, where I live, is a great example of that. Not necessarily in a hardcore context, but in a more general kind of alternative or punk kind of level. This is a city that used to have a pretty thriving scene, and now it seems like the only bands that really ever come through are jam bands or like white reggae bands or Clapton-y like dad rock kind of guitarists or something. But there's no kind of subversive underground kind of scene that thrives here. And I would say that like a lot of that probably started to die as kind of music got more accessible. And that's not to say people shouldn't listen to like any other band that's not from their town. If your town's full of bands that are not that good, you're still gonna listen to other stuff. But I don't know where I'm going with that. I don't know where I'm going with anything.